Now, since you guys love tier lists so much, I decided I'll give the people what they want with a Brawlhalla weapons tier list. Now, keep in mind I'm no pro or anything, but I have reached Diamond more times than I can count, and I'm also aligning this with what I see in tournaments too. Also, since I'm primarily a 1's player, this list will be specifically for that game mode, but at the end of the video, I'll make a short version for 2's too, as there are a lot of glaring differences between the two modes. And I just wanted to make a quick disclaimer that this shouldn't discourage you from choosing any weapon or force you to drop the weapon you like the most, especially if you're in the lower ranks, since meta really doesn't matter down there. And realistically, anyone is viable in any rank. Anyways, starting off with what I think is the worst weapon in the game, unarmed. Now, you might think I'm trying to downplay my main weapon by saying this, but realistically, unarmed is still a disadvantaged state. Unarmed is still incredibly viable since it can rack up damage super fast. Dare can out-prioritize almost every recovery in the game with ease, and every single move after D-Light is a true combo. I'm putting it in B tier as I don't think any weapon is lower than that. I'm not really sure how to order this tier exactly, but next is my least favorite weapon and the only weapon I'll truly never touch, Greatsword. Greatsword has always played a different version of Brawlhalla to everything else ever since its release, and I'll forever despise it simply for that reason. But as far as weapon meta goes, Greatsword is in an uncharacteristically bad spot since it got gutted and had most of its true combos removed. This might change now that BMG have been experimenting with grounded dodge changes, pun intended. But for now, I'd put it in B tier as the worst weapon besides unarmed. Chakram got gutted in a pretty similar way to Greatsword, so I'm debating where exactly to put it, but I'd say it's still typically better since it was allowed to keep some of its true combos, and there are still quite a few pros who have stuck by Priya and are still playing her to this day, albeit not nearly as many as the first tournament she was legal in. I'm seeing a lot of similarity between this weapon and Greatsword in terms of how they fit into the meta, so I'll put it right in front of Greatsword in B tier for now. Now, Cannon is really hard to balance because it needs side light and side air to be as good as they are, otherwise the weapon kinda just doesn't work properly. But having said that, it's also one slight buff away from being extremely broken again, like it was in the past. I wouldn't say Cannon is bad. I don't think any weapon is particularly horrible in the current meta, but Cannon is definitely on the low end towards the top of B tier. I'll be the first to admit that Lance is incredibly annoying to go against, but by no means is it overpowered, and in higher elo. Besides Olgrim, there really aren't that many Lance players about. If you were to ask a silver player what the best weapon in the game is, they'd probably say Lance or Greatsword, but me personally, I don't think it has much going for it besides the fact that higher ranked players forget that it exists. That doesn't mean a Lance can't zero to death you out of nowhere, but it takes more than just a dodge read and isn't instantly guaranteed. I'd put it in the top of B tier, but feel free to order B tier differently than I have. Now, Sword has almost always been a reliable weapon since the very beginning of Brawlhalla esports, and it would be hard to call this weapon bad. However, since Priya saw her claim to fame, Sword has really fell under the radar due it also receiving nerfs just like Chakram and Greatsword did. Sword is still solid, but it definitely did fall off a bit in the meta, so I'll put it in A tier. Katars are also what I'd consider in a weird spot currently. The weapon has a lot of drops and inconsistencies, and mine and Foda's biases aside, it does really struggle since most of its combos are escapable. If you're watching this in the future when the grounded dodge changes have been implemented, then you'll probably find this placement weird, but since the feature is still only an experimental, I'm going to put this weapon in A tier. Blasters have had a bumpy ride this year, going from the absolute worst weapon in the game for the longest time to having a couple of patches at the very top. After some readjustments and the 4-hit true combo being removed again, I'd say Blasters is in a healthy spot right now. Not bad by any means, but clearly overshadowed by the upcoming weapons in this list, so it gets to be an A tier. I personally think Bow is incredibly underrated and is slowly making its come up at the moment, even though I'm not really one to play it unless it's Yumiko. It's definitely seeing a lot more use in 2's, but for 1's it's still in a good spot, despite getting a couple of nerfs to both downlight and sidelight, which were honestly in response to its overwhelming presence in 2's tournaments recently. I personally think it's around the middle of the pack in A tier. If there's anything I feel like you guys are going to disagree with, it's my placement for Axe. Don't get me wrong, I think Axe is very solid, but I wouldn't consider it the absolute best weapon in the game, even after all the Taros and Olgrim that plagues the top ranks. Axe neutral light and downlight have both been slowed down by a couple of frames recently, which might be enough to bump it down a few places in the tier list. At least for me personally, it drops Axe to the top of A tier. Now for Spear, and you either love it or you hate it, and honestly, I don't really mind it. Spear gets a lot of flack for being easy and all the combos being the same, but the people commenting that are saying it on combos that are completely different from the last, so I wouldn't listen to those types of people too much anyways. Spear is, however, in a great spot regardless, because if played optimally, everything will end up leading into double D-Light Sair. It's in a good spot not just because of how easy it is, but also because of how hard it is to deal with, and is our first S tier of the video. Now, I don't really play battle boots very often myself, ironically because of the same reasons my commenters don't like Spear. But I can't help but notice the sheer amount of pros using this weapon lately. Mainly on Tesca, but regardless, battle boots has it all. It has movement built into most of its moves, great priority, all the benefits of a string weapon and still managing to have true combos, and even true kill confirms. I'm personally not a fan of this weapon, but it does deserve a spot in S tier. Despite its recent sidelight nerf, Hammer is still in an exceptionally good spot, and will only get better if the grounded dodge changes get accepted, as sidelight will in itself get a buff due to its nature. Hammer is kinda hard to use due to the way it has to play neutral properly, but once you get the hang of it, Hammer is unstoppable. It's one of those weapons that gets carried by momentum and can easily wipe out stocks faster than Scythe, especially if you're recovering people off stage. Hammer's been at the top for a while now, and still it deserves to be put in S tier. This is another weapon I pretty much refuse to touch, not for any reason other than I find it boring. But I can't deny that Orb is on the come-up recently, especially in the pro scene. Orb has an answer to everything and plays the game super safe with moves like Dare that have basically no counterplay, and off the top of my head I can't think of a single move on Orb's kit that doesn't have insane priority. Now that Chakram got gutted, Orb has the most true combos out of every weapon in the game and racks up damage like it's nothing. I'm personally putting Orb in S tier, and if you don't agree with me, just wait till BCX and you will do too. Now for my personal favorite weapon in the game, Gauntlets. And no, I'm not a meta slave. I've been playing this weapon since 2017 and have multiple Gauntlets legends over level 50. I won't downplay this weapon though, as it's always been relatively one of the best, with neutral air being arguably one of the single most overpowered moves in the game, contributing to both on and off stage, but mostly off stage where this weapon shines the most. Knowing when to use neutral air off stage could single-handedly win matches for you even at the highest level. But that's not the only thing Gauntlets has going for it. Gauntlets also excels with its string potential, and when played optimally, the strings used being inescapable without a dodge. This one is a very obvious S tier in my opinion. Now for Scythe, which seems to be the bane of everyone's existence, and I can understand why. Scythe's priority is unrivaled except for maybe Orb, and active input instantly puts this weapon pretty much above all else, with having access to more options, and that's not even mentioning the hundreds of different combo routes and the ability to just dominate offstage with reverse nair alone. The optimal playstyle at the top involves hitting your opponent once or twice, resetting your jumps on stage, rinse and repeat, and there's no weapon that excels at this more than Scythe does. I think if there's anyone to disagree that Scythe is currently the best weapon in the game, it's because they main it themselves and just want to downplay its ability. But me personally, I'm going to put it at the very top of S tier. Now, does this mean you should just play Mordex? Absolutely not. Like I said in the beginning of the video, if you're not at least Diamond, meta shouldn't even matter to you because the weapons aren't even being used in the ways that would make them strong. And if you are Diamond or above like me, just play what you want. It's really not that deep. Now, I consider 2's own completely separate game mode with its own meta, so I'm going to do a quick tier list for what are the best weapons to use in that game mode, and if I'm honest, I think the meta matters a lot more in that game mode, thanks to team combos and specific follow-ups. I'm going to go through these a lot quicker than I did for once, but in C tier we have Greatsword, which I consider pretty much unplayable due to it being designed with ones in mind, and since it's nerfs, it's now even harder to use this weapon in 2's. B tier are what I consider bad options, but not completely unplayable. Or more to the point, more playable than Greatsword is. A tier is where I'm putting Katars, because whereas they're not the worst for 2's, there's plenty of more viable options as you can see with how many weapons are left. S tier is where all the extremely viable weapons go, and you practically can't go wrong with any combination of these, and I'm hesitant to order these since they're all pretty much equally viable. With 2's, it's more about legend comp and less about weapon comp, since signatures play a larger role. Now, I'm obviously not the biggest 2's player myself, but I have recently been getting back into watching tournaments, and I much prefer 2's in that regard. So my opinion is mostly based off of what I've seen and not what I've experienced. So having said that, feel free to disagree and let me know what you would change. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.